A new career brought me to a small, remote town, far from anything familiar. It was supposed to be a chance to start over, but the moment I crossed the town's border, a sense of unease settled over me. The streets were empty, with streetlights casting pale, flickering glows on old, worn-out buildings. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of my car engine as I navigated through narrow roads. My rented house stood alone at the end of a desolate lane, almost hidden by overgrown trees and shadows. It was small, old, with wooden walls that seemed to sag under the weight of time. The porch creaked as I stepped up, and the front door groaned as it opened, as if reluctant to let me in. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and something else, something damp and stale. I dragged my suitcase to the empty living room, where I set up an air mattress. The house was bare, stripped of any warmth or welcome. I tried to ignore the hollow echoes my footsteps made and the way every board creaked under my weight. It was just an old house, I reminded myself. Just a house. Exhaustion pulled at me. I lay down on the air mattress, wrapping myself in a blanket. The day had been long, and I craved sleep. But as I lay there, the house seemed to come alive with whispers of creaks and groans. The wind outside brushed against the windows, and branches tapped the glass like bony fingers. I must have drifted into a light sleep, because the next thing I remember was being jolted awake. It was a creak, distinct and deliberate, coming from somewhere on the far side of the house. My eyes shot open, and I lay still, my heart thumping hard in my chest. The sound echoed again, and I couldn't tell if it was just the house settling or something. Someone moving around. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was nothing. The house was old after all. Old houses made noises. It was probably just stress and exhaustion playing tricks on me. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping sleep would return, but the silence that followed felt too thick, too tense. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight from beside the air mattress and stood up, my hands trembling slightly. The beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off bare walls and empty corners. My footsteps sounded loud, too loud, as I moved from room to room. I checked the kitchen, the tiny bathroom, the dusty bedroom where the mattress lay on the bare floor. Nothing. Just the house, I whispered to myself, though the words felt hollow. The house stood silent, almost as if it was listening. Reluctantly, I returned to the air mattress. I set the flashlight beside me and pulled the blanket up to my chin. My rational mind insisted there was nothing to fear, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was hiding something, that I wasn't really alone. Sleep refused to come. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to every groan and whisper of the house. Hours seemed to drag by, and just when my eyes began to feel heavy, a sudden noise yanked me back into full alertness. Another creak. This time, it was louder and much closer. The sound came from just outside the living room door. My entire body tensed, frozen in place. The air felt thick, and I could barely hear my own breathing over the pounding of my heart. I lay still, every muscle tight, straining to listen. Then something shifted. A soft, dragging sound, like a foot sliding across the wooden floor. It was slow, deliberate. Whoever or whatever it was, they were moving carefully, quietly, as if trying not to be heard. Panic surged through me, and I clenched my phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. But I didn't press it. Not yet. I needed to be sure. needed to know I wasn't imagining it. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The sound barely carried into the darkness, swallowed up by the oppressive quiet. There was no response, no movement, just silence. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, the quiet returned, wrapping itself around me. But the feeling of being watched lingered. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, a trick of the mind in an unfamiliar place. But deep down, I knew better. Clutching the flashlight tighter, I forced myself to stay awake, my body rigid and ready for whatever might come next. At some point, exhaustion must have won, because I drifted into a restless doze, the flashlight still clutched tightly in my hand. It felt like I'd barely closed my eyes when I was pulled awake once more, this time by a series of creaks, louder and more insistent than before. They were moving, coming straight toward me. I snapped upright, breath caught in my throat. The room was dark, the only light a thin sliver of moonlight seeping through the cracked blinds. My fingers fumbled for the flashlight, but before I could turn it on, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, pale and shadowy, was moving silently across the room. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. He had no face, just a blank, featureless expanse where his features should have been. He glided rather than walked, his form drifting eerily, and he made no noise save for the groan of the floorboards beneath him. Fear rooted me to the spot. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The figure moved closer, and it was only when he was mere feet away that my survival instincts kicked in. I lunged for the light switch, slamming it on with a desperate gasp. The room flooded with light, and the figure was gone. The air was still. The house was silent once more. But I could still feel the cold, suffocating terror that lingered in the room. Trembling, I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, choking out what little I could explain. A break-in, a man in the house. That was all I managed before my voice failed me. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but no amount of reassurance could shake the feeling that the darkness still held secrets I wasn't meant to see. The police arrived quickly, their lights flashing through the windows, bringing a small sense of relief to the otherwise oppressive night. 2 officers stepped inside, their heavy boots echoing through the house, breaking the silence that had weighed so heavily on me. I stood in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, trying to steady my shaking hands. They asked questions. Did I see anyone? Was anything taken? I described the faceless figure as best as I could, but my voice felt weak and unconvincing, even to my own ears. One of the officers exchanged a skeptical glance with his partner, but they still went through the motions of searching the house. They checked every room, every closet, and even the dusty, cramped crawl space in the basement. But there was no sign of anyone. The doors were locked, the windows secure. The house was empty, or so they said. One officer approached me, trying to reassure me. "It's probably a squatter," he said, his voice calm but tired. "Someone who's been using the house while it was vacant. They hide when someone new moves in. We'll keep an eye on the area." I nodded, but his explanation didn't settle the dread coiling in my stomach. A squatter might explain the noises, but not the thing I'd seen. Not the faceless man who had glided soundlessly through the room. The police left, promising to patrol the neighborhood and check in on me the next day. The house fell silent again, emptier than ever, yet still suffocating. I sat on the air mattress, too afraid to close my eyes. flashlight clutched in my hand. The house seemed to mock me with its stillness, every shadow a reminder of what I had seen, or thought I had seen. The logical part of my brain tried to rationalize it, tried to convince me that fear and exhaustion had twisted reality. But deep down, I knew better. Somehow, I knew the house wasn't done with me. The darkness held something, something that watched and waited, and no amount of light would keep it away. The next day came slowly, dragging itself over the horizon with a gray, unfriendly dawn. I hadn't slept, too haunted by the image of the faceless man and the feeling that he might return. The air in the house felt heavy, as if it were holding a secret I wasn't meant to know. Each creak of the floor and groan of the wooden walls felt deliberate, almost as if the house were alive and mocking my fear. I tried to go about my day, unpacking boxes and setting up what little I had brought with me. Every task felt mechanical, done out of a need to distract myself rather than any sense of purpose. But no matter what I did, the feeling never left. The sense that someone or something was watching. The sunlight spilling through the blinds should have made me feel safer, but it didn't. The corners of the rooms seemed darker than they should have been, shadows pooling and shifting in ways that made no sense. I avoided looking at the reflections in the windows, afraid I might see that pale, featureless figure standing just behind me. The police stopped by in the afternoon, as promised. They asked if I had experienced anything strange since they'd left, but I didn't have much to report. The house had been silent, as if waiting for night to fall again. The officers looked around, made polite small talk, but I could tell they didn't believe anything sinister was happening. They left me with a number to call if anything else occurred, but their skepticism was clear. As evening crept closer, the dread returned, coiling tighter with every fading ray of sunlight. I couldn't bear the thought of facing another night alone, but I had no choice. I double-checked the locks on every door and window, moved a chair under the doorknob to the bedroom, and left every light in the house on. But no matter how many precautions I took, it felt like a battle I was destined to lose. The house had secrets, and I was now a part of them. The faceless man, the whispers in the dark, the feeling of being watched. It was all a reminder that some places are never truly empty, and some fears never really go away. As the sky darkened, a suffocating quiet settled over the house. I sat in the small bedroom, surrounded by the weak yellow glow of a bedside lamp, listening to every sound. The day's false comfort had evaporated, replaced by the creeping sense of inevitability. Whatever was here, it was waiting for me, and darkness was its invitation. The house began to make noise again. It started with soft, almost apologetic creaks, like someone testing the floorboards. My hands gripped the edges of the chair, knuckles white. Every instinct told me to run, but where would I go? The nearest neighbor was a mile away, and the police had already combed the place with no results. A sudden bang shattered the stillness, echoing through the walls. It came from the kitchen. My heart leaped into my throat, and I forced myself to stand. My legs felt heavy, but I grabbed the flashlight and edged out of the bedroom. The hallway stretched before me, shadowed and ominous, each step an act of will. I reached the kitchen. The door to the backyard stood wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. I knew I had locked it, checked it twice before night fell. My pulse hammered as I stepped closer. The air was cold, far colder than it should have been. A whisper cut through the silence. It came from the living room, a soft mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was speaking. The flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the living room, illuminating empty corners and shadows that danced away from the light. Then the whisper turned into laughter, a low, rasping chuckle coming from behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the open door, the darkness beyond it, and the growing realization that whatever haunted this house wasn't simply a squatter or a trick of the mind. It was something far worse. I backed away, retreating to the bedroom. The laughter stopped, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. I locked the door behind me, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The feeling of being watched pressed down harder than ever, and I knew with a bone-deep certainty that I had crossed into a realm where light and locks offered no protection. The house had taken me in, and whatever lived within its walls was finally making itself known. The bedroom felt like a fragile fortress. I sat on the edge of the mattress, every light on and the flashlight still gripped in my hand. My phone lay beside me, already dialed to 911, ready for a single tap if things got worse. But even the thought of calling felt hollow. The police had already been here, and they couldn't stop whatever haunted this place. Minutes crawled by. Each one waited with tension. The air felt charged, almost electric, and every creak or groan seemed amplified, echoing in the pit of my stomach. Then, from just beyond the bedroom door, I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock. 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 I stopped breathing. The knocks were gentle, almost polite, but they carried an undeniable menace. My hand hovered over the phone, my thumb shaking. Then came the whisper, the same mocking tone that had laughed at me earlier. It seeped through the door, a raspy voice that made my skin crawl. "Let me in," it whispered. The words were playful, taunting, as if the thing outside enjoyed my fear. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My voice felt trapped in my throat, and the only sound I could manage was the erratic beat of my heart. The knocking stopped, but the voice remained, its breathy tones wrapping around the room. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, each word dragging like nails on glass. "This house doesn't forget." I backed away, moving to the far side of the room. The chair I'd wedged under the doorknob felt useless, a flimsy defense against whatever was on the other side. The whisper turned into a hum, a chilling, tuneless melody that rose and fell as if the thing were swaying in the hallway. Then the doorknob twisted. I pressed myself against the wall, flashlight beam aimed uselessly at the door, which rattled as if something were testing the barrier. The knob turned slowly, almost lazily, but the chair held. The humming stopped, replaced by a long, dragging sigh. "Soon," the voice whispered, fading into the silence. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, flashlight aimed at the door long after the noises had faded. But the sense of dread only deepened. The house felt more alive, more aware, as if it was waiting for something. And I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that this was only the beginning. The hours passed in a haze of fear. My body was stiff from clinging to the wall, but I couldn't bring myself to relax. Every sound, every shift in the shadows outside the window made me flinch. The whispering, the humming, the slow twisting of the doorknob. None of it felt like something I could explain away or reason through. Just as I was beginning to think the worst might be over, that the house had finally gone quiet, the air changed. It grew heavier, pressing down on me with an almost physical force. My ears popped, and the room felt colder, colder than it had any right to be. Then the lights flickered. The steady glow of the lamps around me pulsed, dimmed, and returned, casting long, trembling shadows that stretched and twisted over the walls. The flashlight in my grip sputtered, the beam struggling to stay steady. A feeling of pure, unfiltered terror surged through me as I watched the shadows gather, pooling like liquid in the center of the room. They deepened, growing darker and darker until a figure began to take shape. It was the faceless man, pale and silent, but this time he didn't glide. He loomed, tall and oppressive, a figure made of shadows and cold. I couldn't move. The flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled away, its light spinning across the floor. The figure didn't advance. It stood there, featureless and still, but I could feel its eyes on me, boring into me, even though it had no face. The whisper returned, but now it seemed to come from all around me. "This house remembers," it hissed, and I could feel the walls around me shiver, as if the very structure of the building was reacting to the presence. The fear broke me then, and I screamed. The kind of raw, desperate scream that stripped my throat. I scrambled backward, tripping over the mattress and crashing to the floor. The impact knocked the breath from me, but that sudden jolt of pain brought a surge of clarity. I reached for the flashlight, grasping it in a white-knuckled grip, and pointed it at the figure. The light flared, and for a brief moment, the shadow figure faltered, flickering like a dying flame. It twisted and writhed, shrinking into itself until it vanished, leaving only the empty, bitter cold behind. The house fell silent once more, but I didn't trust it. The figure may have disappeared, but its presence still lingered, seeping into the walls and floor. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever had taken hold of this house wasn't going to let me go easily. Grabbing my phone and keys, I stumbled out of the bedroom, every step feeling like a desperate race to escape. The house seemed to watch me leave, its silence echoing in my ears. I didn't look back as I ran out the front door and into the night, the cold air biting at my skin. The house had shown me its secrets, and I knew that if I stayed, it would consume me completely. This place was more than haunted. It was alive, and it remembered. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked beneath an old, twisted tree that seemed to lean in, curious and silent. My hands fumbled with the keys, trembling so hard I nearly dropped them. Finally, I managed to unlock the door, throwing myself into the driver's seat and locking the car behind me. I sat there, chest heaving, trying to catch my breath. The house loomed behind me, a shadow in the darkness. Its windows stared, blank and cold, and I could feel its presence even with my back turned. I had the sense that if I looked at it too long, I might see that faceless figure standing at one of the windows, watching me with unseen eyes. The engine roared to life, and I didn't waste a second. My tires skidded over the gravel driveway as I reversed and sped away, the headlights cutting through the night. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from that house, that town, away from whatever had haunted me since I arrived. As I drove, the memories of the last 2 nights played in my mind. The creaking, the whispers, the figure made of shadows. The house wasn't just haunted, it was something more, something ancient and hungry, a thing that held grudges and remembered. I shuddered, gripping the steering wheel tighter, unwilling to let myself believe that it was over just because I had left. The lingering haunt. I found a small motel on the edge of town, its neon sign buzzing in the darkness. The clerk barely looked up as I checked in, too used to travelers passing through. I locked myself in the room, turning on every light and leaving the TV on for background noise. The empty motel room felt safe in a way the house never had, but the silence still pressed in, and I flinched at every creak and groan of the old building. Sleep was out of the question. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my phone and wondering what to do next. The police would never believe me if I told them the truth. I barely believed it myself. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to that house. It was a place that kept its secrets and its spirits, a place that held onto the people who dared to disturb it. I watched the clock on the wall tick slowly toward morning, the minutes dragging by. The events of the past 2 nights felt unreal, but the fear still pulsed through my veins, a reminder that what I had experienced was very real. As the first light of dawn seeped through the thin curtains, I finally allowed myself to breathe. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, that the house's memory was long, and its reach was farther than I knew. I had left, but deep down, I knew the house hadn't let me go. Not really. It had marked me, and no matter how far I ran, the darkness had already found its way in, already